A billionaire single dad walked into his mother's company dressed as a janitor. Not because he had lost everything, but because wealth had made one question impossible to answer. Could anyone love him without loving his name? Before sunrise in rain-soaked Seattle, Daniel Whitmore pushed a squeaking cleaning cart across the marble lobby of a tower his family owned. Executives passed without seeing him. Then the revolving doors opened, and his 9-year-old daughter ran inside, calling him Dad in front of everyone. One woman stopped. She did not see an heir of fortune or a powerful last name. She saw a frightened child and a tired father trying to protect a secret. Stay until the end, because this story reveals what dignity, trust, and real love look like when status disappears. Like the video and comment where you are watching from. The woman in the elevator had seen only a frightened child and a man in a janitor's uniform. She could not have known that the man standing below her had spent years building walls around both himself and his daughter. 3 months earlier, Daniel Whitmore stood barefoot in the kitchen of his waterfront home on Bainbridge Island trying to rescue a stack of pancakes that had fused together in the shape of a collapsed building. His daughter sat at the island with a pencil behind one ear and a math worksheet beneath her elbows. "You used too much milk again," Sophie said. "That sounds like an accusation." "It is an observation. You are 9. You are not supposed to sound like my accountant. Your accountant probably knows how to make pancakes." Daniel placed the least damaged one on her plate. Outside the windows, Puget Sound lay beneath a layer of silver fog. A ferry moved toward Seattle, its lights dim in the distance. The Whitmore home was large enough to appear in magazines, but the kitchen belonged entirely to them. Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator. Muddy sneakers waited beside the door. Daniel's suit jacket hung over a chair because he had forgotten to take it upstairs. For 4 years he had built their life around ordinary routines. Breakfast at 7, school at 8, dinner at home whenever possible, one chapter before bed even when a board meeting ran late. He protected those routines because Sophie had already watched too much of her childhood become public. Daniel's phone rang on the counter. Margaret Whitmore. Sophie glanced at the screen. "Grandma is going to ask if you are still coming tonight. I never said I was. You wore your serious face. Grandma thinks that means yes." The ringing stopped. A message appeared. "Dinner at 7. Do not cancel. Elise is looking forward to meeting you." Sophie read it upside down. "Is Elise the hotel woman? Her family owns hotels. Does she know about me?" "Yes." "Does she know about me, or does she know I am a Whitmore?" The question changed the room. Daniel set down his coffee and crouched beside her. "She knows you are my daughter. That is all she needs to know." Sophie stared at her pancake. "Grandma acts like you are interviewing mothers. No one is interviewing for anything." Sophie nodded, but she did not believe him. That evening, Daniel crossed Elliott Bay through hard rain. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a hotel in Belltown with glass walls and a private elevator. Elise Warren was already seated. She was elegant, intelligent, and easy to speak with at first. She discussed a restoration project in New Orleans and asked about Daniel's years managing Whitmore investments overseas. Then the questions changed. How soon will Margaret retire? "She has not announced a date, but you will become CEO. That decision belongs to the board." Elise smiled. "The board belongs to your family. The family owns a controlling interest. That is not the same thing." "Close enough." When the waiter approached, Elise ordered without looking at him. Daniel noticed. He always noticed how people treated someone they did not need. Halfway through dinner, Sophie called. "The wind is making that sound in the chimney again," she whispered. "It cannot get into the house." "I know. Is Mrs. Nolan downstairs?" "Yes." "Do you want me to stay on the phone?" "No. I just wanted to hear you." "I am here." After Daniel ended the call, Elise lifted her wine. "You answer every time she is 9. You have a caregiver. She has a father. I only mean children adjust to boundaries. You cannot stop everything whenever she feels nervous. She went through a divorce, too." Elise sighed lightly. "You cannot build your entire life around one child." The noise of the restaurant seemed to fall away. Daniel reached for his coat. Elise blinked. "You are leaving?" "Yes. I did not mean it cruelly. I know. That made it worse." She leaned forward. "Your mother said you wanted to meet someone serious. My whole life is already built around my daughter. Anyone who sees that as a problem is not serious to me." He left before dessert arrived. Margaret was waiting in his living room when he returned. She sat near the fireplace in a dark green suit, looking less like a mother than the founder who had built a construction office into one of the most powerful development companies in the country. Daniel stopped inside the doorway. "Do you have my house under surveillance? I have a key." That was not the question. Elise called. I am sure she did. She said you left because of one careless comment. Daniel loosened his tie. She said I should not build my life around my child. People are allowed to say the wrong thing and still be good. Daniel crossed to a cabinet and removed an old magazine. His former wife smiled from the cover in a white evening gown. Beside her stood Daniel and a younger Sophie. The headline celebrated Rebecca as the woman who had married into Seattle's most powerful family. Daniel placed it on the table. She brought photographers into this house after I told her not to. Margaret looked down. She arranged charity events around Sophie. She let a magazine photograph Sophie's bedroom. When I objected, she said privacy had no value. Rebecca made terrible choices. When the marriage ended, she did not ask what Sophie needed. She asked what the settlement would look like if I became CEO. His voice remained quiet, but a years of anger lived beneath it. After the divorce, one woman bought Sophie a diamond bracelet after our second dinner. Another asked which properties she would inherit. A third called her a future flower girl before we had discussed marriage. Margaret closed the magazine. Not every woman is Rebecca, I know. But Sophie watches them change after they learn our name. I can survive being used. She should not have to. The fire shifted behind the glass. Margaret stood and walked to the window. What if they did not know your name? Daniel stared at her reflection. What are you suggesting? You are expected to return to Whitmore Urban Group before the anniversary gala. The board has not voted. They will. Margaret turned. Before the announcement, spend 3 months inside the company without your name. Daniel laughed once. She did not. As what someone nobody performs for. He understood before she said it. No. The custodial department has an opening. You want me to spy on your employees? I want you to see them. I see the reports. Reports show what happens when people know leadership is watching. Character is what remains when they believe nobody important is in the room. Daniel looked toward the staircase. And Sophie, she stays here on weekends. During the week, you rent a small apartment in Seattle. Mrs. Nolan and I can help when you work late. This is manipulative, yes. The admission stopped him, Margaret continued. Your life is already shaped by manipulation. People adjust themselves to your money. You want to remove the money. This is one way. Daniel looked at the magazine on the table. What are the rules? Margaret's eyes sharpened. 12 weeks. A new employment record. A different last name. No driver, no assistant, no executive access, and no personal money beyond what an entry-level custodial worker could spend. No hotel, a 1-bedroom apartment in South Seattle, no company car. You will take the bus. Who knows 2 people in human resources? Rosa Alvarez will believe you are a normal hire. Everyone else will know nothing. What about photographs? You have spent years overseas and avoided the press. Most employees know your name, not your face. The pictures online are old. Grow your beard, wear inexpensive glasses, and stop standing like everyone owes you an explanation. I do not stand like that. You do. Margaret stepped closer. There is one more condition. You cannot turn this into a test where everyone else is judged and you are not. Daniel frowned. You will learn who they are, she said. They will only know the man you choose to show them. If a woman trusts Dan Miller, remember that Daniel Whitmore is still lying to her. He said nothing. Fear may explain deception, Margaret said. It does not erase the injury. Upstairs, Sophie called his name. Daniel found her sitting against the headboard with her blanket over her knees. Grandma is still here, she said. Yes. Did the hotel woman hate kids? No. She did not understand us. Are you going to another dinner? Not for a while. That means Grandma has a plan. Daniel smiled faintly. You know her well. He explained that he might work at the company before becoming CEO. What job? Sophie asked. Cleaning. She stared at him. You do not know how to clean. I know how. You put red socks in the white laundry. That happened once. Everything turned pink. It was a difficult day. Sophie tried not to laugh. Then she grew serious. Why would you clean Grandma's building? Daniel considered giving her an easy answer, but easy answers rarely survived with Sophie. People treat you differently when they think you have power. They treat me differently too. I know. You want to see who is nice when they think you are nobody. Daniel took her hand. I'm not nobody, I know that. But they will think you are. The following Monday, Daniel moved into an apartment above a laundromat in South Seattle. The walls were thin, the pipes knocked at night, and a bus sighed to a stop outside every 20 minutes. He placed one photograph of Sophie beside the bed, then turned it face down before leaving. At Whitmore Tower, a human resources manager handed him an identification badge. Dan Miller. The name looked harmless. It also felt like an accusation. Rosa Alvarez met him in a basement supply room. She wore practical shoes and the expression of a woman with no patience for excuses. She handed him a uniform and pointed to a cleaning cart with a squeaking wheel. You ever cleaned 46 floors? No. You ever cleaned one? Daniel hesitated. Not professionally. Rosa placed a mop in his hands. Then today you are not experienced enough to have opinions. His first week humbled him. He missed a bus and arrived 6 minutes late. Rosa made him stay after his shift. He used too much soap and nearly sent an attorney sliding into a wall. Blisters formed across his palms. His back hurt by Thursday. He learned that executives left cups inches from trash cans. He heard managers discuss layoffs while he emptied wastebaskets beside them. People spoke around him with the freedom they reserved for furniture. On Wednesday morning, a young analyst stepped backward into Daniel's wet floor sign and knocked it down. The analyst looked at Daniel as if the sign had moved on its own. You need to keep this out of the way. Daniel glanced at the yellow warning symbol lying beside the man's polished shoes. It was beside the wall. Then put it closer to the wall. The analyst walked away without lifting it. Daniel bent to pick it up. Across the lobby, Rosa had seen everything. You want to say something, she asked later. Yes, do not. Is that your management philosophy? That is my rent payment philosophy. Her answer stayed with him. Daniel had spent most of his adult life believing silence was a choice. For Rosa, Marcus, and Keisha, silence often protected a paycheck, health insurance, or a child waiting at home. Power was not only the freedom to speak. Sometimes it was the freedom to survive the consequences of speaking. He also learned names that never appeared in board reports. Marcus Bell took 2 buses from Tacoma because parking cost more than he could afford. Keisha Price kept food in her locker for employees who skipped dinner. Rosa worked nights so she could care for her husband during the day. The custodial break room had a leak above the vending machine. A plastic bucket sat beneath it. Has maintenance seen this? Daniel asked. 3 times. What did they say it is on the list? How long is the list? Rosa glanced at the bucket. Long enough for that thing to have seniority. By the 2nd week, Daniel began recognizing the rhythm of the building, the morning rush, the quiet after lunch, the tension before client presentations, the sudden kindness of certain managers whenever Margaret's car appeared outside. One evening, voices rose behind the glass walls of the design department. Claire Bennett stood at one end of a conference table. Brandon Shaw sat at the other, closing his laptop. That was my proposal, Claire said. It became a company proposal when it entered the room. You removed my name. I removed a distraction. You changed the affordable housing ratio. I made the project financially responsible. You made it easier to sell. Brandon stood and buttoned his jacket. Good ideas are not rare, Claire. Executives who know what to do with them are. He passed Daniel in the corridor without looking at him. Claire remained behind, gathering papers with hands that shook despite her effort to control them. Daniel should have kept moving. Instead, he said, the original version was better. Claire looked through the glass. You heard the presentation, the walls are thin, and you understand mixed income zoning. Daniel adjusted his grip on the mop. I read. She stepped into the hall. What was better, the courtyard. It gave families a place to see one another without making the building feel crowded. He replaced it with private terraces. Her eyebrows lifted. You noticed that from the screen it was a large screen. For the first time that evening she smiled. It was tired, surprised, and real. What is your name? Daniel touched the badge on his shirt. Dan. Claire. I know. She glanced at the department sign and smiled again. Right. Daniel moved his cart aside. Claire took 2 steps, then turned back. Thank you, Dan. For what? For seeing what changed. She walked toward the elevators. Daniel remained beside the conference room listening to the squeak of his cartwheel as it settled. That night, Sophie called while he sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment. How was cleaning educational? Did you break anything? Only my pride. Grandma says you had too much of that. Your grandmother is becoming a bad influence. Sophie laughed. Then she asked, Did anyone talk to you? A woman named Claire. The woman from the lobby. Daniel looked toward the window where rain blurred the streetlights below. The same one. Was she nice before she knew who you were? She still does not know. That is what I mean. Daniel leaned back in the chair. She thanked me. For cleaning. For noticing something. Sophie was silent. Then she asked, Do you like her? I barely know her. That is not what I asked. Daniel smiled despite himself. It is complicated. Sophie sighed with the patience of someone much older. It is only complicated because she does not know your real name. Daniel looked at the badge lying on the table. Dan Miller. For the first time, the name did not feel like protection. It felt like a closed door between himself and the only person in the building who had stopped long enough to see him. The badge remained on the table long after Sophie ended the call. Dan Miller. 2 words printed in black beneath a photograph that looked almost like Daniel, and not quite enough like him to feel honest. The next morning he fastened the badge to his uniform and returned to Whitmore Tower before sunrise. Seattle was still wrapped in darkness. Rain moved across the sidewalks beneath the streetlights, turning the city into a blur of silver pavement and red brake lights. Inside the lobby, Rosa was already filling spray bottles at the supply station. She handed Daniel a clipboard. 31st floor first. Design someone worked late and left half the department looking like a paper factory exploded. Daniel tried not to look too interested. Rosa noticed anyway. You know somebody up there? I spoke to the department director. You speak to a lot of department directors. Only the ones who steal my mop. Rosa gave him a flat look. Do not get clever before coffee. When Daniel reached the design floor, the lights were dim except for a row of lamps near the conference rooms. Empty takeout containers covered one table. Architectural plans had been spread across the floor and waited at the corners with coffee mugs. Claire was asleep at her desk. Her head rested on one arm. A pencil was still caught between her fingers. On the screen in front of her, a financial model displayed rows of red numbers. Daniel stopped in the doorway. For several seconds, he simply watched her breathe. She looked different without the controlled expression she carried through meetings. Younger, tired, human in a way the glass walls of the office rarely allowed. He set down his cart as quietly as he could. Claire stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, then widened when she saw him. What time is it? 6:15. She sat upright. I was supposed to go home. That is usually what people do at night. She rubbed her face. Brandon moved the Harbor House review to this morning. Daniel looked at the screen. Why? So I would not have time to correct the numbers he changed. Claire stood and stretched the stiffness from her shoulders. She noticed him looking at the model. You can say it. Say what? That I look like someone who lost an argument with a spreadsheet. You look like someone who stayed until 6 in the morning because the argument mattered. Her expression softened. That was almost kind. I am working on it. She walked to the small kitchen counter and discovered the coffee pot was empty. Daniel lifted a paper cup from his cart. I brought one from downstairs. Claire stared at it. You brought me coffee, I brought myself coffee. Then I remembered you drink it without sugar. She accepted the cup. You remembered? Daniel turned toward the mess of plans. I remember unnecessary details. Claire took a sip, watching him over the rim. That can be useful. He began collecting the empty containers. As he passed her desk, he glanced again at the financial model. A line involving retail lease revenue did not match the assumptions Claire had described the night before. Daniel stopped. This number is wrong. Claire came beside him. Which one? The commercial lease projection. It came from finance. It assumes every unit starts at full market rate. That is how Brandon wants it presented. Then Harbor House will lose the local businesses you wanted on the first floor. Claire leaned closer to the screen. The lower rate was the reason the grocery cooperative agreed to join. Daniel pointed to another section. If you use graduated leases, the first 2 years remain affordable. The rates increase after the tenants establish revenue. Claire looked at him. You are suggesting a stepped commercial structure. I am suggesting the bakery should not pay the same rent in its first month that a national company pays after 10 years. She studied his face. Dan, where did you learn this? The honest answer rose immediately. From 2 decades of reading development reports, from sitting beside his mother in acquisition meetings, from watching his father negotiate with store owners who had built businesses before Whitmore Urban Group existed. Daniel looked away. My father worked in construction. Construction workers do not usually discuss lease structures. He read a lot. So do you. He lifted one shoulder. Claire turned back to the model and began typing. If this works, it changes the entire presentation. It will work. You sound certain. I have seen it work. She stopped typing. Daniel felt the silence tighten. Where, she asked. He reached for a container on the desk. Different projects. What projects? He crushed the paper lid more forcefully than necessary. Claire watched him. Then she closed the laptop halfway. You do that every time. Do what step close enough to make me trust you, then disappear behind an answer that means nothing. Daniel met her eyes. He wanted to tell her. The confession felt almost possible in the quiet office before the elevators began opening and titles returned to everyone in the building. Instead, he said, "There are parts of my life I am not ready to explain." Claire looked disappointed but not angry. Are they dangerous? Illegal, no. Are you married? Daniel answered immediately. No. Something in her shoulders relaxed. He noticed. She noticed him noticing. Good, she said. The words stayed between them. At 8:30, Brandon entered the conference room, expecting Claire to fail. She did not. Daniel watched from the hallway as she presented the revised structure. Board members who had dismissed the local retail component began asking serious questions. The graduated lease model strengthened both the community plan and the long-term financial forecast. Brandon said little. His jaw tightened whenever Claire received praise. After the meeting, he remained behind while the others left. Daniel was replacing a trash liner near the door. Brandon closed his folder. You had help. Claire gathered her plans. I have a team. Your team was not here last night. I was. You do not understand commercial leasing well enough to produce this alone. Claire stopped. That sounds less like criticism and more like an admission that you underestimated me. Brandon looked past her toward Daniel. For the first time, he did not look through him. He looked at him. Daniel lowered his eyes and continued working. Brandon walked into the hallway. As he passed, he said quietly, Custodial staff should be careful about listening to conversations that do not concern them. Daniel tied the trash bag. Most conversations concern the person cleaning up after them. Brandon turned. Claire stepped into the hallway before he could respond. Is there a problem? Brandon smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Not yet. He walked away. Claire waited until the elevator doors closed. You should not provoke him. He provoked me. He can have you removed. Daniel looked at her. Would you let him know? The answer came so quickly that both of them felt its weight. Claire folded her arms. But you make it difficult to protect you when I know almost nothing about you. I did not ask you to protect me. That is not how protection works. Daniel looked down the empty corridor. He thought of all the women who had offered loyalty after seeing his house, his name, or his future position. Claire was offering it to a man who pushed a cleaning cart. That should have relieved him. Instead, guilt pressed harder against his chest. That evening, her car refused to start in the underground garage. Daniel found her standing beside it with the hood raised and rainwater dripping from the edge of the concrete ramp. Do you know anything about engines? She asked. A little. You always know a little. He looked beneath the hood. The battery connection is loose. Claire held up her phone as a light. Daniel tightened the terminal with a small tool from his cart, but the engine still did not turn. You need a new battery, she sighed. My roadside service says 2 hours. Daniel checked the time. The bus comes in 12 minutes. Claire looked at his uniform. You take the bus, yes. Every day, yes. You understand structural plans, commercial leasing, and electrical systems, but you do not own a car. Daniel lowered the hood. Those facts are not legally required to match. Claire laughed. The sound surprised him. They ran through the rain toward the bus stop, sharing an umbrella that was too small for both of them. Daniel kept shifting it toward Claire until one side of his uniform was soaked. You are getting wet, she said. I work with water. That is not the same thing. It is close. The bus arrived almost empty. They sat near the back while the city slid past in wet reflections. Daniel checked his phone. A message from Sophie waited on the screen. "Did you remember the volcano supplies?" He closed his eyes. Claire noticed. "Bad news, I forgot baking soda. That sounds serious. My daughter is building a volcano for school. You have a daughter." Daniel looked at her. He had hidden enough. "Yes. How old, 9? What is her name, Sophie?" Claire smiled. "The girl in the yellow raincoat." He nodded. "She is your daughter, not your niece." Daniel's head turned sharply. "You knew I knew she did not look at you like an uncle. Why did you not say anything? Because she was scared and you looked more scared than she did." Daniel stared at the floor of the bus. "I am raising her alone." Claire's voice softened. "What happened to her mother?" For a moment, Daniel heard Rebecca's voice inside the old house. He saw photographers in Sophie's bedroom. He remembered his daughter hiding beneath a table while adults argued about custody schedules and public appearances. She wanted people to see her being a mother more than she wanted to be one. Claire did not offer pity. She simply said, "That must have been hard on Sophie." "It was, and on you." Daniel looked out the window. "I had work. That was not my question." He turned back toward her. "No," he said quietly. "It was not easy." The bus crossed downtown as evening gathered over the waterfront. Claire leaned against the seat. "My mother raised my brother and me by herself." Daniel waited. "My father left when I was 7. We moved every time the rent went up. Spokane, Tacoma, Kent, then Seattle. 7 apartments in 10 years. She looked through the window at rows of new towers. People talk about housing as if it is only square footage and market value. When you are a child, housing is whether you unpack your box before someone tells you to pack it again. Is that why you designed Harbor House? It is why I refuse to let Brandon turn it into another building where the people who clean it cannot afford to live." Daniel thought of Rosa's leaking break room, Marcus riding 2 buses from Tacoma, the executive reports that described labor costs without naming the people represented by those numbers. Claire looked at him. "What does Sophie want to be?" "It changes every week. Right now, an engineer who studies oceans. That is specific. She likes bridges and whales, a difficult combination. She believes in keeping her options open." The bus slowed near Pioneer Square. Claire glanced outside. "I am hungry, so am I. There is a food truck courtyard 2 blocks away." Daniel looked down at his uniform. "I am not dressed for dinner." She stood as the bus stopped. I asked the man inside the uniform. "He seems available." The courtyard sat beneath strings of warm lights. Rain tapped against canvas awnings while people gathered around heaters with paper cups and steaming bowls. Daniel and Claire shared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup at a wooden table near the edge. For the first time, nobody around them knew either of their names. Claire tore her sandwich in half. "I once dated a man who owned 3 restaurants." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Was the food good? The food was excellent. The man was not. "What happened?" He treated every waiter as if they had personally disappointed him. "Why did you stay?" Claire considered the question. I confused confidence with character. Daniel waited. One night, his driver arrived late. The driver's son had been taken to the emergency room. He fired him before the man finished explaining. Claire looked down at her soup. "I realized kindness that only moves upward is not kindness. It is strategy." The words reached Daniel with uncomfortable precision. Claire had shown him kindness without knowing his power. He had shown her affection while controlling the truth. "What about you?" she asked. "What about me? Have you dated since Sophie's mother a little? That sounds painful. It was expensive." Claire laughed. Daniel smiled, then grew serious. "Most people did not know what to do with Sophie. Children are not furniture. You do not have to know where to place them." He looked at her. "That may be the best thing anyone has ever said about parenting." Claire lifted her cup. "I accept payment in soup." 2 days later, Sophie's caregiver became ill. Margaret was in San Francisco. Daniel had no safe place to leave his daughter after school. He brought her to the basement break room. Rosa crossed her arms when she saw them. "You are bringing children to work now, only the small ones." Sophie stepped forward. "I can organize things." Rosa examined her. "You alphabetize, yes. You take instructions better than my dad." Rosa looked at Daniel. "She can stay." Sophie spent an hour labeling shelves while Daniel cleaned the lobby. When he returned, Claire was sitting at the break room table with Sophie. Colored pencils and paper covered the surface. Sophie had drawn a tall apartment building with trees on the roof. Claire pointed to one corner. You need space for water storage. Rain barrels larger than barrels. The garden will need water in summer. Sophie nodded seriously and added a square beside the stairwell. Daniel stopped in the doorway. Claire looked up. We are designing a city, Sophie corrected her. A city where regular people can live. Claire smiled. Important distinction. Daniel stepped inside. You found her. She found me. She asked where the design department was. Sophie held up the drawing. Claire says apartment buildings can have gardens. Claire is usually right. Claire looked at him. Usually I am protecting your humility. Sophie watched them with open interest. Claire asked, Does your father always talk like this only when he likes someone? Daniel nearly dropped the folder in his hand. Sophie. What? Claire turned away to hide a smile. Daniel walked her to the elevator later. Sorry. For what? She has no filter. I noticed. She also makes conclusions too quickly. Claire pressed the call button. Does she? Daniel met her eyes. The elevator arrived, but Claire did not step inside immediately. She is wonderful, she said. She is my whole life. That is not a warning, Dan. He had heard it treated as one so many times that he did not know how to respond. Claire entered the elevator. Before the doors closed, she said, You are allowed to have more than one important person in your life. That night, Sophie sat on Daniel's couch with her legs tucked beneath her. She likes you. She likes talking to me. That is what adults say when they are scared. Daniel folded laundry. Sophie watched him place one of her shirts in the wrong pile. You have to tell her. I will, when he smoothed the shirt. Soon. She already knows I am your daughter. That is different. She knows the real thing about you. What real thing that you are a dad? Daniel sat across from her. She does not know the rest. Sophie's expression became serious. The rest is only money and grandma. It is more complicated than that. Because you made it complicated. He had no answer. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Claire fell into a quiet rhythm. She left coffee beside his cart. He wrote a note on the cup. Nobody reads zoning reports for fun. The next morning she wrote beneath it. Then you admit you read them. He found reasons to clean the design floor near the end of her workday. She found reasons to remain after her team left. They talked beside windows filled with rain and city lights. Claire told him about her brother, a public school teacher in Tacoma. Daniel told her Sophie read the last page of every book first because she hated uncertainty. Claire asked whether Daniel did the same. No. You seem like a man who wants to know the ending before he begins. I used to. What changed? He looked at her. I began something without knowing how it could end. The air between them shifted. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting filled the floor with a soft red glow. The storm outside pressed rain against the glass. Claire exhaled. Perfect. Daniel took a flashlight from his cart. The backup system should come on. You really do carry everything, not everything. She looked at him. Harbor House may be reassigned. Daniel lowered the flashlight. Why Brandon says I am too emotionally attached to the project. You are supposed to care about your work, not when caring interferes with profit. Daniel stepped closer. You built something worth fighting for. Claire looked toward the dark windows. So did you. He frowned. Sophie. Her voice softened. You could have become bitter. Instead, you became the person she runs toward. Daniel felt something inside him give way. Claire touched his hand. Her fingers were warm against his skin. They stood close enough for him to see the small flecks of gold in her eyes. She leaned toward him. Daniel wanted to kiss her. He wanted it with an intensity that frightened him. Then he saw the badge on his chest. Dan Miller. He stepped back. Claire's hand fell. You do not want this, I do. Then what is it? There are things about my life you do not know. Are you married? No. Are you in trouble? Not the kind you think. Then tell me. Daniel opened his mouth. His phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. He turned it face down. Claire saw the movement. I am sorry, he said. Her expression closed. So am I. She walked toward the stairwell. Daniel remained beneath the red emergency lights until the phone rang again. This time he answered. Margaret did not waste time. Brandon requested access to your personnel file. Daniel looked toward the door Claire had closed behind her. How much does he know? Not enough to identify you. A low hum moved through the ceiling as the building power returned. White light flooded the empty office. Margaret's voice became quieter. "But he knows Dan Miller is not who he claims to be." Daniel looked down at the badge on his chest. Across the floor, Claire's untouched coffee sat beside a stack of plans. He had entered Whitmore Tower hoping someone might see the man beneath the uniform. Claire had. Now the uniform was becoming the very thing that kept her from seeing him clearly. By the time Daniel left the design floor that night, the name on his badge no longer felt like protection. It felt like evidence. Rain followed him all the way home. It struck the bus windows in restless patterns while downtown Seattle dissolved behind him. Margaret's warning remained in his mind. Brandon knew Dan Miller was not who he claimed to be. Daniel had spent weeks worrying about Claire discovering the truth. He had not considered what a frightened and ambitious man might do with only half of it. Across the city, Brandon Shaw stood inside his office with the lights turned low. The building had emptied, but the blinds remained closed. A man named Colin Mercer sat across from him. Colin wore a brown coat that still carried rain on the shoulders. He placed a thin folder on Brandon's desk. "There is no Dan Miller," Colin said. Brandon opened the folder. Inside were copies of employment records, old addresses, and photographs taken outside Whitmore Tower. "The name exists," Colin continued. "The history does not. The background check passed, because someone wanted it to pass." Brandon turned a page. The listed cleaning company where Dan had supposedly worked had closed 4 years earlier. Its former owner had never heard of him. The emergency contact number belonged to a law office that handled private matters for the Whitmore family. The final page showed Margaret speaking with Daniel near the service elevators. The photograph had been taken from across the street. Brandon studied it. She greeted him. She greets employees, not like that. Colin leaned back. "My guess is internal investigation. He was placed in the building to observe management. By Margaret. His hiring was approved by her chief of staff." Brandon closed the folder. For years he had prepared himself to lead Whitmore Urban Group. He had cultivated relationships with board members, secured profitable developments, and removed anyone who stood between him and the executive floor. Now Margaret had placed a man in a janitor's uniform beneath him, a man who listened, a man who understood financing, a man who had grown close to Claire Bennett at the exact moment Brandon was trying to take Harbor House from her. "What has he reported?" Brandon asked. "There is no way to know." Brandon looked through the glass wall toward the dark design floor. "Then we make sure nobody believes him." The following morning, Claire found Daniel cleaning the conference room windows. For several seconds, she stood outside without entering. He saw her reflection in the glass. "You can come in," he said. "I was deciding whether I wanted to." Daniel turned. Claire carried 2 cups of coffee. She placed one on the table but did not slide it toward him. The distance between them felt unfamiliar. "I should have explained last night," Daniel said. "You had the opportunity. I know. Several opportunities." He set down the cloth. "There are things that could affect more than me. That sounds important." "It is. Then why am I not allowed to understand it?" Daniel searched for an answer that was honest without being complete. "There are people I am trying to protect. From me, no." Then from what he looked toward the hallway, Claire followed his eyes. "Brandon partly. Does this have something to do with the company?" Daniel remained silent. Her face changed. "Dan, are you working for someone I work for the custodial department? That is not what I asked." He stepped closer. "I have never tried to hurt you. That is also not what I asked." Claire picked up the second cup. She left his coffee on the table. "I defended you because I believed I knew your character." "You do. I know the pieces you decided to show me." She walked away before he could stop her. Daniel watched her enter her office and close the door. On his cart, his phone vibrated. A message from Margaret appeared. "Brandon requested private security records. We denied access." Daniel typed a reply. "He is moving faster." Margaret answered almost immediately. "Then stop waiting." Daniel looked toward Claire's office. He began walking. Before he reached the door, Brandon appeared at the end of the corridor. He carried a black folder beneath one arm. "Mr. Miller." Daniel stopped. Brandon approached with a pleasant expression that did not reach his eyes. You have become unusually comfortable on this floor. I am assigned here. You are assigned to clean it. That is what I am doing." Brandon glanced toward Claire's office. Some employees forget that proximity to decision-makers does not make them one. Daniel held his gaze. Some decision-makers forget proximity to power does not make it theirs. The smile vanished from Brandon's face. For one quiet second, neither man moved. Then Brandon said, "Be careful." Daniel answered, "You first." Brandon entered Claire's office without knocking. Daniel returned to his cart, but the unfinished conversation followed him through the rest of his shift. 2 days later, Harbor House's confidential financing package disappeared. Claire discovered it at 7 in the morning. The project folder had been removed from a locked cabinet. A digital copy had also been accessed from the department server after midnight. She called security before calling Brandon. By 8, the design floor was sealed. By 9, every employee who had entered the department during the previous 24 hours had been questioned. Daniel was cleaning the lobby when Rosa approached him. "Human Resources wants you upstairs." Her voice was careful. Why, they would not say. He saw concern in her expression. Rosa rarely showed concern. Inside the Human Resources conference room, 3 people waited. The Director of Employee Relations sat at the center of the table. A security officer stood near the wall. Brandon sat beside a black cleaning cart. Daniel recognized it immediately. His cart. The squeaking wheel had left a faint mark across the carpet. On the table lay a silver flash drive sealed inside a clear evidence bag. The director gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, Mr. Miller." Daniel remained standing. "What is this?" "The flash drive was found beneath the lower shelf of your cart." Brandon folded his hands. "It contains confidential financial records from Harbor House." Daniel looked at him. Brandon's face held no victory, only concern carefully arranged for witnesses. "I have never seen it." The security officer placed an access report on the table. "Your identification badge entered the design department at 12:17 this morning." Daniel looked at the timestamp. He had been in the building at 12:17. Sophie had left her school tablet inside Rosa's break room. Daniel had returned after putting her to bed. He had entered through the service entrance, collected the tablet, and left. He had not gone near the design floor. "I was downstairs. Can anyone confirm that number?" Brandon spoke gently. "You have shown an unusual interest in Claire's project." Daniel looked at him. "You know exactly how that drive reached my cart." The director raised a hand. "Mr. Miller, do not make accusations." Daniel's anger sharpened. "I am the one being accused. We are asking questions. No, you found the lowest paid person with access to the floor and decided the search was over." The door opened. Claire stepped inside. Her face was pale. "What are you doing?" The director stood. "Claire, this is a confidential matter. So are the files that were stolen from my department." She saw the flash drive. Then Daniel's cart. Her eyes moved to him. "Tell them where you were." Daniel felt every person in the room waiting. He could explain that Sophie had forgotten her tablet. Then they would ask why his daughter spent time in a restricted employee area. They would review footage. They might trace Margaret's staff, Mrs. Nolan, and the protected address connected to Sophie. The cover would collapse. He could end everything with one sentence. "My name is Daniel Whitmore." Instead, he said, "I cannot." Claire stared at him. "Cannot or will not, I did not take the files. That is not what I asked. I know." The hurt in her eyes was worse than suspicion. Brandon watched silently. The director closed the folder. "Pending investigation, your employment is suspended." Daniel turned toward Claire. She looked as though she wanted him to give her anything solid enough to hold. He had nothing he was willing to offer. The security officer escorted him through the lobby. Employees stopped talking as he passed. Natalie stood near the elevators with 2 members of her communications team. She lowered her voice, but not enough. "I knew something was wrong with him." Daniel heard the words. He also heard the silence around them. No one objected. Rosa waited near the service corridor. When Daniel reached her, she stepped in front of the security officer. "He is not a thief," Rosa Daniel said. "I know every person who touches those carts. He would not hide something where a child could find it." The security officer replied, "Please step aside." Rosa looked at Daniel. Tell them where you were. He could not. Her faith in him did not disappear, but confusion entered it. Daniel lowered his eyes. Take care of the wheel, he said. Rosa's expression broke. Forget the wheel. Outside rain had begun again. Daniel stood beneath the building awning with no cart, no uniform jacket, and nowhere he was expected to be. He had entered Whitmore Tower to learn how people treated a man without power. Now someone had discovered how easily that man could be destroyed. At the apartment, Sophie found him sitting at the small kitchen table in the dark. His badge lay in front of him. She turned on the light. Why are you home? Daniel looked at her backpack. How was school? You never ask that before asking if I am hungry. He tried to smile. It did not work. Sophie placed the backpack on the floor. What happened? Daniel told her that someone had stolen documents and hidden them inside his cart. Do they think you did it? Yes. Tell them you own the company. I do not own it. You know what I mean. Daniel pushed the badge away. I cannot solve every problem by using Grandma's name, but it is your name too. If I reveal myself only when being ordinary becomes painful, then I was never truly willing to live without the privilege. Sophie stood across from him. What about Claire? He looked away. She was there. Did she believe you? She wanted an explanation. Did you give her one? I told her I did not steal anything. That is not an explanation. Daniel looked at his daughter. Her eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. You keep saying Dan is the real you. He is. No, he is part of you. The words echoed Margaret's warning. Sophie continued. You let Claire trust the part that was easy to love. You hid the part that could scare her. I was trying to know if her feelings were real. Were yours? Daniel stared at her. Yes. Then why do you get all the truth and she gets half? He had faced hostile investors, courtrooms, and reporters. None of them had ever made him feel as exposed as his 9-year-old daughter did in that small kitchen. At Whitmore Tower, Claire stood inside an emergency leadership meeting. Brandon had recommended removing her from Harbor House until the security investigation was complete. This is not about my performance, Claire said. Brandon sat across from her. Your personal relationship with a suspected employee creates a conflict. There is no personal relationship. Natalie glanced at her. Claire felt the lie as soon as she said it. Brandon noticed. You have been seen meeting him after hours. He had information about your financial model. Now confidential files are found in his possession. They were found in his cart. A distinction without meaning. It has meaning if someone placed them there. Brandon leaned back. Why would anyone frame a janitor? The question was too precise. Claire heard it. She looked at him differently. You are using this accusation to take my project. I am protecting the company. No, you are protecting your access to the board. Several executives shifted in their seats. Brandon's voice hardened. What exactly do you know about this man? Claire thought of the bus ride, the food truck, Sophie's drawing the emergency lights, and every unanswered question Daniel had placed between them. Not enough, she said. After the meeting, Rosa found Claire near the service elevator. You believe him? Claire answered carefully. I believe he did not take those files. That is not the same thing. No. Rosa looked toward the cameras above the corridor. His cart was alone during the fire inspection. When yesterday afternoon, 20 minutes, maybe more. Who was near it? Half the building. Rosa paused. Brandon's assistant came downstairs. Claire's attention sharpened. Why, she said she dropped an earring. Did she find it? She was not wearing earrings. Claire and Rosa began with the access records. Daniel's badge showed an entry to the 31st floor, but the service elevator registered no trip at that time. The passenger elevators showed no use of his badge. Someone had copied the credential. The security camera outside the design department had gone offline 12 minutes before the files were accessed. Claire requested the maintenance authorization. It carried Brandon's electronic approval. She brought the record to the security director. He read it twice. This could be routine. Then, why was it not logged? He did not answer. Claire spent the afternoon following small inconsistencies. Brandon's assistant had entered the supply room where custodial carts were stored. A replacement badge encoder had been signed out by corporate security and returned without explanation. The flash drive had no fingerprints because it had been wiped clean. The evidence against Daniel looked obvious, only until someone looked carefully. By evening, Claire had enough doubt to defend him. She did not have enough truth to trust him. Daniel's phone rang shortly after sunset. Margaret spoke before he could. "I can end this tonight. How I walk into the building and tell them who you are. That clears my name because of my name. It also stops Brandon." Daniel moved to the window. "What happens to Claire's project?" "The board has postponed the review. Because of me. Because Brandon is using you." Daniel watched Sophie asleep on the couch with a book open across her chest. "If this only cost me the job, I would remain silent, and now it is costing Claire the work she built." Margaret was quiet. "So you are ready to tell her?" Daniel looked at the badge on the table. "I am ready to tell everyone." A knock sounded at the apartment door. Daniel ended the call. Claire stood in the hallway. Rain darkened the shoulders of her coat. Her hair was damp and exhaustion showed beneath her eyes. "How did you find me?" he asked. "Your employment file." She stepped inside before he invited her. Her gaze moved through the apartment. The cheap furniture, the nearly empty shelves, the suitcase still resting beneath the bedroom door. Nothing looked lived in. Nothing looked permanent. Claire turned slowly. "This place looks like a stage set." Daniel closed the door. "It is temporary. Everything about you is temporary. That is not true." She faced him. "Your address is false. Your employment history is false. Your badge access does not match the building records. Margaret Whitmore's chief of staff approved your hiring." Daniel said nothing. Claire stepped closer. "Who are you, I wanted to tell you. That sentence means nothing unless you finish it. I am not working for Brandon. I know. I did not steal the files. I know that too. Then why are you here? Because believing you are innocent does not explain why you lied." Daniel looked toward the couch. Sophie stirred beneath the blanket. Claire followed his eyes. "I am not asking about her. She is part of the reason." "Then tell me the rest." Sophie sat up slowly. Claire turned. The word landed between them. Sophie rubbed her eyes and reached for the tablet beside her. The screen lit automatically. A news article filled the display. Daniel saw the photograph before Claire did. It had been taken years earlier at a Whitmore Foundation event. Daniel stood beside Margaret, clean-shaven and dressed in a black suit. The headline read, "Whitmore heir expected to return for company anniversary." Claire stared at the image. Then at Daniel. Her face emptied of every expression except disbelief. Whitmore Daniel took one step toward her. "My name is Daniel Whitmore." Claire looked around the apartment again. The son of Margaret Whitmore. Yes, the man expected to become chief executive. Yes. Her voice became quieter. "And you let me believe you were a janitor. I worked as one. That is not the same as being one." "Claire, the bus rides, the apartment, the uniform. Was any of it real?" "My feelings were real. That was not my question." Daniel felt Sophie watching him. "I wanted to meet people without the company name between us, so you put a lie between us instead." "I did not know this would happen. You designed this entire situation. My mother proposed it, and you agreed." "Yes." Claire's eyes shone. "Did she know about me?" Daniel hesitated. That hesitation answered her. Claire stepped backward. "Was I discussed?" She asked about you. "Was I evaluated at first, perhaps?" A small sound escaped her, not quite a laugh. "You were testing me." "No, not after I knew you." "When was that, Daniel?" "After I bought you coffee, after I told you about my mother. After I met your daughter." He could not find an answer that would not sound like another defense. Claire reached for the door. "I was going to tell you before the anniversary gala." She turned. "Before you walked onto a stage and everyone learned that the janitor owned the building, I do not own it. Do not hide behind technical truths now." Daniel followed her into the hallway. "Claire, please." She faced him near the elevator. "You wanted to know whether someone could love you without your money." The elevator doors opened. Tears stood in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Did you ever stop to ask whether that person could love you without the truth?" Daniel had no answer. Claire stepped inside. "Do not come after me tonight." The doors closed between them. Daniel remained in the hallway as the elevator descended. Behind him, Sophie stood in the apartment doorway holding the tablet against her chest. For 12 weeks, Daniel had feared that the truth would make Claire see only his wealth. He had never considered that the lie might make her unable to see him at all. The elevator carried Claire away before Daniel found the courage to move. He remained in the hallway, staring at the closed doors as though they might open again and return the last 5 minutes to him. They did not. Behind him, Sophie stood in the apartment doorway with the tablet pressed against her chest. "Dad." Daniel turned. She looked smaller than she had that morning. Her hair was tangled from sleep and one sock had slipped halfway off her foot. "I did not mean for her to see the article. I know. Is she angry with me? No. Then why did she look at me like that?" Daniel walked back into the apartment and lowered himself in front of her. "She looked at both of us because she was hurt." Sophie's eyes filled. "I lied too. You were protecting me because I asked you to. So it is your fault." The question was not cruel. That made it harder. "Yes." Daniel took the tablet from her hands and set it aside. "It is my fault." Sophie looked toward the empty hallway. "Are you going to fix it?" "I do not know if I can. You always say problems can be fixed. I say most problems can be worked on. That means the same thing. No, sweetheart. Sometimes you can do everything right after doing something wrong and the other person still gets to leave." Sophie sat beside him on the floor. "Do you want her to leave? No. Then tell her. She already knows. She knows your name. She does not know why you were scared." Daniel leaned back against the wall. He had explained his fear to Margaret. He had explained it to himself during every bus ride and every night in the small apartment. But fear sounded different when spoken to the person it had wounded. It could sound like an excuse. His phone rang. "Margaret," Daniel answered. "Claire knows." His mother was silent for a moment. "How she came to the apartment. Sophie had an article open. Is Sophie all right? She thinks this is her fault. It is not." "I know." Margaret's voice softened, and Claire Daniel looked at the closed apartment door. "She asked me not to follow her." "Then do not. The gala is tomorrow." "Yes, we cannot announce me like nothing happened." Margaret took a slow breath. "The board expects a succession announcement. They will get one. What are you planning to say the truth?" "Which truth? All of it." The next evening, Whitmore Tower no longer resembled the building Daniel had cleaned for 12 weeks. The marble lobby glowed beneath hundreds of suspended lights. Tall arrangements of white roses and cedar branches stood between the columns. Historical photographs filled the walls showing construction crews' ribbon cuttings and Margaret beside Daniel's late father when they were both young enough to believe exhaustion could be defeated by ambition. A jazz quartet played near the windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Champagne moved through the room on silver trays. Employees who usually passed one another without speaking now gathered in evening clothes beneath the same roof. Daniel watched the celebration from a private conference room above the lobby. His suit was dark charcoal. His beard had been trimmed. The inexpensive glasses remained. On the table beside him sat the blue custodial badge. Dan Miller. Sophie entered wearing a dark blue dress and silver shoes. Margaret followed her. For the first time in Daniel's memory, his mother looked uncertain. "You kept the glasses," she said. "I need them, I know. I thought they were part of the disguise. Only the frames." Sophie walked to the window. "Claire is downstairs." Daniel's attention shifted immediately. "How do you know I saw her car?" Margaret looked at her granddaughter. "You were supposed to remain with Mrs. Nolan. I was looking through the curtain." Daniel joined Sophie at the window. Below them, the ballroom moved like a field of dark suits and bright dresses. Then he saw Claire. She stood near the design department display wearing a simple green dress. Her hair was pinned back through a few loose strands framed her face. She was speaking to a member of the board. Nothing in her posture revealed what had happened the night before. Daniel recognized the effort required to appear that composed. Sophie touched his hand. She came. She came for Harbor House. Maybe she came for both. Daniel looked down at his daughter. "You cannot decide what she feels, I know." Sophie paused. "But neither can you." Across the lobby, Claire felt the room watching her. The rumors had begun before she removed her coat. Natalie Cross approached with a glass of champagne and an expression arranged to resemble concern. "You look calm." Claire turned. "Should I not be? I heard about Dan Miller. I am sure everyone has." Natalie lowered her voice. "I also heard he is not actually Dan Miller." Claire's stomach tightened. Then perhaps you should wait for the announcement. Natalie studied her face. You knew? No, of course. The words were gentle. The accusation beneath them was not. Claire looked past her toward Brandon, who stood near the bar speaking with two board members. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes moved repeatedly toward the private elevators. Natalie followed Claire's gaze. If you did know, I would understand. There is nothing for you to understand. A relationship with the future chief executive can become complicated. Claire faced her fully. There is no relationship. Natalie smiled faintly. That may be even more complicated. She walked away. Claire remained beside the Harbor House display. The model showed rooftop gardens, family courtyards, and small retail spaces along the ground floor. It represented 3 years of work. Now every person who looked at it might wonder whether it had survived because Daniel wanted Claire to succeed. The thought made her feel ill. Brandon approached. I am sorry you were pulled into this. Claire turned toward him. You do not sound sorry. I warned you that Miller was not who he appeared to be. You accused him of theft. The evidence did. The evidence was constructed. Brandon's expression did not change. That is a serious claim. So is disabling a security camera. A flicker crossed his face. Claire saw it. He leaned closer. You should be careful tonight. Is that another warning? It is advice. When Daniel Whitmore walks onto that stage, everyone will assume you knew who he was. I did not. Perception rarely cares about facts. Claire held his gaze. Neither do you. Brandon smiled. Facts are usually whatever the board can prove. Before Claire could answer, the lights dimmed. The jazz quartet stopped. Conversations faded as the outgoing chief executive stepped onto the stage. Margaret stood near the curtain, watching the room. Sophie waited beside her. Daniel stood several feet behind them with the badge in his hand. The chief executive began with the company's history. He spoke of Margaret's first office near the waterfront, of projects that reshaped Seattle, and of the responsibility that came with building places where other people lived and worked. Then he turned toward the succession announcement. Tonight, Whitmore Urban Group begins a new chapter. The room became still. Our next chief executive has spent years overseeing international investments, but during the last 12 weeks he chose to study this company from a position none of us expected. The lights shifted. Daniel walked onto the stage. For one suspended second, the lobby made no sound. Then recognition moved through the crowd. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered near the bar. Natalie's face lost its color. Rosa stood at the back beside Marcus and Keisha, staring at Daniel as though she had never seen him before. Brandon did not move. Claire looked directly at Daniel. There was no surprise in her eyes, only the quiet pain he had carried with him since the elevator doors closed. Daniel reached the podium. A prepared speech rested on the screen before him. He turned it off. For the last 12 weeks, many of you knew me as Dan Miller. Whispers moved through the room. Daniel looked toward the custodial staff. I cleaned offices, I emptied trash, I rode the service elevator, I listened while people discussed employees as expenses and communities as markets. He paused. I also watched people offer kindness when they believed there was nothing to gain from it. Several faces turned toward Claire. She remained still. Daniel continued. When I agreed to work here under another name, I believed I was removing wealth from the question of trust. I told myself that if people did not know who I was, I could finally know who they were. Margaret watched him carefully. Daniel looked down at the badge in his hand. I was wrong about one thing. The room quieted again. I believed everyone else was being tested. He lifted his eyes. But I was the person withholding the truth. Claire's breath caught. Daniel looked at her. Claire Bennett did not know my identity. A murmur moved through the crowd. She did not know my family owned this company. She did not know I was expected to become chief executive. She received no promise, no promotion, and no advantage from me. Claire's hands tightened at her sides. Daniel continued. She trusted a man she believed had no influence here. I rewarded that trust by deciding when she was allowed to know the truth. His voice remained steady, though the next words cost him more. She owes me no forgiveness. Nobody in the ballroom moved. Claire looked away first. Brandon stepped forward from the crowd. This is a moving confession, Daniel. Margaret's expression hardened. Brandon continued toward the stage. But it does not explain why confidential Harbor House files were found in your possession. The room erupted into whispers. Daniel turned. They were found in my cleaning cart, under the name you fabricated. Brandon looked towards the board members. He entered this building under false pretenses. He accessed restricted departments. He gathered information while employees believed he was harmless. Daniel remained at the podium. Brandon spread his hands. If another employee had done the same, security would have called the police. Claire moved through the crowd. Then, perhaps security should explain who copied his badge. Brandon looked at her. Claire reached the front of the stage. The elevator records do not match Daniel's access log. The camera outside my department was disabled through an authorization connected to your office. Brandon's voice sharpened. You are hardly an objective witness. No, Claire said. I am the person whose work you tried to steal. The screen behind Daniel changed. Margaret's chief security officer appeared near the stage controls. Records filled the display. The first showed Daniel's badge entering the design department after midnight. The second showed no elevator carrying that badge to the floor. The third showed Brandon's assistant entering the custodial supply room during the afternoon inspection. Another record displayed a payment from Brandon's private consulting account to Colin Mercer. Then came the final document. The missing flash drive had been created on a computer inside Brandon's office. Brandon looked toward the security officer. This is incomplete. Daniel stepped away from the podium. You hired an investigator to uncover Dan Miller's identity. I believed you were spying on senior management, so you framed an employee. I protected the company from an unknown threat. Daniel came to the edge of the stage. You placed stolen files in a janitor's cart because you believed no one would question what happened to a man in that uniform. Brandon's face tightened. You were never a janitor. Daniel looked toward Rosa. For 12 weeks I was paid to do the same work they do every night. You could walk away whenever it became uncomfortable. Daniel absorbed the truth in the accusation. Yes, he said. I could. Brandon seemed surprised by the answer. Daniel continued. That is why my experience does not equal theirs. I had a way out. They often do not. Rosa's expression changed slightly. Daniel looked back at Brandon. But my privilege does not excuse what you did to someone you thought had none. Security officers approached. Brandon looked toward Margaret. You cannot allow this. I delivered record profits for this company. Margaret's voice carried across the room. And believed profit purchased the right to destroy people beneath you. Brandon turned to the board. No one stepped forward. The officers escorted him toward the lobby doors. He passed Claire without looking at her. At the back of the room, Natalie lowered her champagne glass. The silence that followed felt larger than the celebration. Daniel returned to the podium. He could have continued speaking. Instead, he placed the Dan Miller badge beside the microphone. Then he stepped down. Rosa waited near the service corridor. Daniel approached her slowly. She looked at his suit, then at his face. So the glasses were fake. The lenses are real. The beard also real. The bad back, painfully real. Rosa did not smile. You let me yell at the future chief executive. You were usually right. I called you useless with a floor buffer. You were completely right about that. She looked toward Margaret. Did she put you there to inspect us? She suggested the job. I agreed because I wanted to understand the company. Rosa folded her arms. You could have asked us. Daniel had no defense. Yes. You could have listened without pretending. Yes. She studied him. If you fire people for what they said while you wore that uniform, you learn nothing. I agree, and do not turn us into a speech. Daniel glanced toward the stage. I may have already failed that part. Rosa's mouth almost moved into a smile. Daniel held out his hand. She looked at it. Then she pulled him into a brief embrace. You still owe me a replacement wheel, she said. I will approve the budget personally. No, you will bring the cart downstairs yourself. Daniel nodded. Tomorrow morning. When Rosa released him, Sophie stood a short distance away. Claire was no longer beside the Harbor House display. Daniel saw the terrace doors closing. He followed. Outside, the covered balcony overlooked Elliott Bay. Ferries moved across the black water, their lights trembling in the rain. Claire stood near the glass railing. Daniel stopped several feet behind her. I know you asked me not to follow you. That was last night. Do you want me to leave? Claire did not turn. No. He remained where he was. Inside, applause began for an award presentation neither of them could hear clearly. Claire watched the rain. Did your mother choose me? No. Did she know you were interested in me? Yes. How much did you tell her? Very little. That is not a number. I told her you were kind to Sophie. I told her you defended Harbor House. I told her I cared about you. Claire closed her eyes. Did she ask whether I passed? Daniel looked toward the ballroom doors. At first she asked what I thought of you. That is not what I asked. He answered quietly. Yes. Claire turned. The hurt in her face was sharper now because it was controlled. So I was evaluated. At the beginning. When did it stop? The morning you helped Sophie in the lobby. That was the first morning I met her. Yes. Then why did you continue lying for weeks? Daniel stepped closer, then stopped when her shoulders tightened. Because the moment it stopped being an experiment was the moment I became afraid. Claire shook her head. You were already afraid. That is why you created Dan Miller. No. Before you, I was afraid of being used, and after I was afraid of losing something real. Her eyes filled. You keep using the word real as if saying it often enough makes everything else disappear. I know. Did Sophie understand what you were doing? She knew I was working under another name. She did not understand the full reason. You asked a child to hide her father. Daniel looked down. Yes, you made her call you her uncle. Yes. You were so determined to protect her from dishonest people that you taught her to lie for you. The words landed harder than anything Brandon had said. Daniel did not defend himself. Claire looked through the glass toward Sophie, who stood beside Margaret inside the ballroom. She thinks I am angry with her. I told her you are not. She should never have been placed between us. You are right. Claire studied him, perhaps waiting for an explanation. He gave none. After a moment she asked, Why did you speak about me in front of everyone? Because people were already making assumptions. You could have cleared my name privately. They would have continued whispering. They still will. Daniel looked through the doors at Natalie and the executives gathered near the stage. Yes, Claire's voice softened. I do not want you protecting me by controlling the story again. I was not trying to control you. You decided what the room should believe about me. I told them the truth. You told them your version of it. Daniel absorbed that. What should I have done? Asked. The answer was simple. It exposed how rarely Daniel had been required to ask anyone before changing the direction of a room. I am sorry, he said. Claire looked away. I believe you. Hope rose too quickly in him. Then she added, That does not mean I am ready to forgive you. I understand. Do you? Yes. She faced him again. I cannot report to you. You will not. Harbor House cannot be approved because of your influence. It will go before an independent committee. I do not want a favor. It is not a favor. It is a boundary I should have created before involving you. Claire studied his face. For the first time that evening, some of the anger gave way to exhaustion. You thought taking away your money would reveal everyone else. Yes. What did it reveal about you? Daniel looked out at the water. That I believed fear gave me the right to control how much truth another person received. Claire was silent. Inside the ballroom, Sophie had moved closer to the glass doors. She watched them without hiding it. Claire followed Daniel's gaze. She needs to hear from me. Daniel opened the door. Claire entered the ballroom and walked directly toward Sophie. She knelt in front of her. Sophie lowered her eyes. I am sorry I showed you the article. Claire took her hands. You did not do anything wrong. I lied about Dad. You were trying to protect him. Are you leaving us? The question silenced Claire. Daniel stood several feet away, unable to breathe. Claire looked at Sophie with tears in her eyes. I do not know what happens between your father and me. Sophie's mouth trembled. But I will never disappear without saying goodbye. She embraced her. Sophie held on tightly. When Claire stood, she looked once at Daniel. There was care in her expression. There was also distance. She collected her coat and left the ballroom alone. Daniel did not follow. Sophie joined him near the windows. Together they watched Claire's car move away from the tower and disappear into the rain. She still loves you, Sophie whispered. Daniel placed an arm around her shoulders. Maybe. Then why did she leave? Because love does not remove hurt. Sophie leaned against him. The gala continued behind them. Music returned. Glasses lifted. Employees gathered around the man they now knew would lead the company. Daniel heard none of it clearly. For years, he had believed true love could be found by removing his fortune from view. Now he understood that being loved without money was not the same as being loved without truth. He held Sophie closer as the city lights blurred across the wet glass, and for the first time since becoming Dan Miller, he stopped asking whether Claire's feelings had been real. He began asking whether he had been brave enough to deserve them. 3 months after the gala rain still moved across Seattle with the same steady patience. Whitmore Tower looked unchanged from the street. The same black glass reflected the gray sky. The same revolving doors turned beneath the brass company name. The same elevators carried hundreds of people toward offices, meetings, and decisions that rarely reached the employees working below them. Inside, however, the building had begun to sound different. Daniel noticed it one morning while standing in the basement break room. The bucket beneath the leaking ceiling was gone. Fresh paint covered the walls. New lockers stood where dented metal cabinets had once leaned at uneven angles. A refrigerator hummed beside a long table, and a row of windows had been added near the ceiling to let in natural light. Rosa entered carrying a cardboard box filled with coffee filters. She looked at Daniel, then at the suit he wore. "You are blocking the cabinet." Daniel stepped aside. "Good morning to you too. You stopped working nights. You no longer get the friendly version." "I do not remember the friendly version." Rosa placed the box on the counter. "That is because you were not paying attention." Daniel smiled. 3 months earlier, he might have explained the renovation. He might have mentioned the budget review, the ventilation report, or the new transportation support for employees leaving after midnight. Now he let the room speak for itself. Rosa opened a cabinet and inspected the shelves. "You put too many cups in here. The facilities team selected the supplies. You approved the order. I approve many orders. That does not make this less wrong." Daniel loosened his tie and began moving cups to the lower shelf. Rosa watched him. "You have a board meeting in 20 minutes. I know. And you are organizing paper cups. I am correcting an operational error. That is a very expensive way to describe it." Marcus entered the break room and stopped when he saw Daniel crouched beside the cabinet. "Should I come back?" Rosa answered no. "The chief executive is learning where cups belong." Marcus placed his lunch in the refrigerator. Daniel stood. How is the new bus allowance? Marcus looked surprised by the question. "It helps. How much I am not spending $80 a week getting here anymore." Daniel nodded. "And the schedule change." Marcus glanced at Rosa. She said, "Tell him. It means I can pick up my son from my mother's house before midnight." Daniel looked at the floor. "Good." Marcus left for his shift. Rosa closed the cabinet. "You cannot keep asking people if every policy works." "Why not?" "Because they will tell you what they think you want to hear. Then how do I know you listen when they are complaining to someone else?" Daniel looked at her. "That is how I ended up here the first time." "Yes, only now everybody recognizes your face." She handed him a cup of coffee. "You will have to learn another way." Daniel carried the thought upstairs. His first months as chief executive had not felt like a promotion. They felt like walking into rooms where every chair had been arranged before his arrival. People waited for him to speak first. They studied his expression before offering disagreement. Senior leaders who had ignored Dan Miller now laughed too quickly at Daniel Whitmore's ordinary remarks. He hated how easy it was to confuse obedience with respect. During the board meeting, the chief financial officer presented the cost of the new employee policies. Health contributions for contract custodial workers. Transportation support for employees leaving after public transit became limited. Independent reporting channels for workplace harassment. Leadership evaluations connected to employee retention and conduct. 2 required working days each year for senior executives inside operational departments. A board member named Charles Hendricks adjusted his glasses. "We are creating expenses without measurable returns." Daniel looked at the report. The returns are lower turnover, fewer complaints, and a workforce that does not have to choose between getting home safely and keeping a job. Those are values, not returns. They are both. Charles leaned back. "You spent 12 weeks cleaning offices. That experience may have become personal. It did. That does not make it sound policy." Daniel closed the report. "No. The data makes it sound policy." He slid another document across the table. The first transportation pilot had reduced night shift absences by 19%. Staff turnover in the custodial division had already begun to fall. Reports of unpaid additional hours had exposed 2 subcontractors violating company agreements. Daniel looked around the table. These changes are not gifts. The room became still. They are corrections. No one challenged him again. After the meeting, Margaret waited near the windows. She had remained chairwoman, but had withdrawn from daily management. That did not stop her from appearing whenever she believed Daniel needed advice he had not requested. "You handled Charles well," she said. "He was wrong." That has never stopped him from being persuasive. Daniel collected his papers. Margaret studied him. "You look tired." "I am. Sophie says you are sleeping at the office." "Sophie exaggerates. She said you came home after she was asleep 4 nights last week." Daniel stopped. "That is not an exaggeration, no." He looked toward Elliott Bay. "I am trying to repair a company that operated under our name." Margaret's voice softened. "You are also trying to repair something else." Daniel did not answer. Claire still worked on the 31st floor. Daniel had kept his promise. Harbor House had been transferred to an independent review committee led by 2 outside architects, a housing policy specialist, and a board member with no reporting relationship to Daniel. Claire retained control of the design. Daniel did not attend her presentations. He did not visit her office. He did not leave coffee near her desk. Their conversations were brief and formal. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Good morning, Ms. Bennett." The distance between those words felt greater than the ocean outside the windows. Margaret stepped beside him. "Have you spoken to her?" "Only about company matters. Perhaps she needs time. She asked for space. Space becomes distance if nobody crosses it." Daniel turned toward his mother. "I spent months deciding what she needed without asking. I will not do that again." Margaret absorbed the criticism. "I owe her an apology." "Yes, I was trying to help you. I know. You say that as though it makes no difference. It explains why you did it. It does not change what happened." Margaret looked away. Daniel heard the echo of Claire's words in his own voice. For the first time, his mother seemed to hear it too. That evening, Daniel returned to the Bainbridge house before Sophie went to bed. He found her at the dining table building a model bridge from wooden sticks and glue. The structure leaned dangerously to one side. Daniel removed his jacket. "That support will not hold." Sophie did not look up. "It is not finished. The weight is pulling outward. I know. You need another brace. I know." Daniel sat across from her. "You're angry with me." "No, you use the same voice Rosa uses when she is angry with me." "Maybe Rosa is right a lot. She would agree with that." Sophie pressed another piece into place. Daniel waited. Finally she said, "You missed science night." His chest tightened. "I thought it was next Thursday. It was yesterday." He looked toward the calendar on the refrigerator. The date had been circled in blue. "I am sorry. You always say that. That does not mean I do not mean it. It means you keep doing things that need it." Daniel sat back. She had inherited Margaret's precision and Claire's ability to place a truth exactly where it hurt. "I have been working too much. You worked too much before you became a janitor, I know. You said the cleaning job taught you to notice people. It did." Sophie finally looked at him. "Then notice me." The room went silent. Daniel reached across the table, but Sophie pulled her hand away. He let his remain where it was. "You are right. I know. I told myself I was changing the company for people who had been ignored. You are ignoring me at home." "Yes." Her eyes filled. "Are you doing all this because you want Claire to think you are good? No." Sophie studied him. Daniel answered again. "Not only because of Claire. That means partly." He nodded. "At first, maybe. I wanted her to see that I understood what I had done. And now I am doing it because the company needed to change before I ever wore the uniform." Sophie looked down at the bridge. "What about us?" Daniel's voice lowered. "We need to change too." He moved his chair beside her. "I asked you to keep my secret. I made you call me your uncle. I told myself I was protecting you from people who might use us." Sophie pressed her lips together. "The truth is I was scared. You already said that." "No, I explained why I was scared. That is different." She glanced at him. Daniel continued. "My fear belonged to me. I made you carry it." The tears she had been holding slipped down her cheeks. "I thought Claire left because I showed her the article. She did not leave because of you. She has not come back. That is because I hurt her. Sophie wiped her face. Do you still love her? Yes. Does she love you? I do not know. You always know everything. Daniel smiled sadly. No. I am only surrounded by people who are paid to make it seem that way. Sophie leaned against him. He wrapped one arm around her and looked at the unfinished bridge. Can I help? She handed him a wooden brace. Do not use too much glue. I know how glue works. You said that about pancakes. The next morning, Daniel changed his schedule. He blocked 2 evenings each week for Sophie and left them untouched even when board members complained. He attended her school meetings. He helped rebuild the bridge after their first attempt collapsed. He also began taking the ferry home instead of using the company car. On the water, nobody waited outside his office. Nobody entered with reports. He could stand beside the railing and think. Claire's life inside Whitmore Tower had become more difficult in quieter ways. No one openly accused her of using Daniel. They did not need to. Conversations stopped when she entered the kitchen. Invitations to lunch became less frequent. Colleagues who had once challenged her openly now agreed too quickly, as if disagreement might offend the chief executive through her. One afternoon, she presented a revised Harbor House courtyard plan. Her deputy nodded before Claire finished speaking. It is excellent. You have not seen the cost analysis. I am sure it is excellent too. Claire closed the folder. Tell me what is wrong with it. Nothing. There are 3 problems. Her deputy looked uncomfortable. Claire, I do not want this to become political. It is a drainage plan. You know what I mean. She did. By the end of the week, Claire had drafted a resignation letter. She carried it in her bag for 3 days. On the 4th evening, she went to the renovated basement break room because the upper floors felt too quiet. Rosa sat at the table eating soup from a glass container. Claire took the chair across from her. Rosa looked at the envelope in Claire's hand. Bad news. I am thinking of leaving. Rosa continued eating. That is one way to make Brandon successful. Claire frowned. Brandon is gone. He wanted your work. You leave, he still takes it. This company will never believe I earned anything after Daniel. People believe whatever keeps them comfortable. Claire looked toward the new windows near the ceiling. I cannot lead a team that is afraid to disagree with me. Then make them disagree. How be wrong? Claire stared at her. Rosa lifted one shoulder. Choose a bad idea. Present it with confidence. Wait, that is terrible leadership, so is accepting fake agreement. Claire almost smiled. Rosa placed the spoon down. You love the project, yes. You believe it should exist, yes. Then do not give your work to people who prefer rumors. Claire looked at the resignation letter. Rosa added, let them become uncomfortable. The next day, Claire presented a deliberately flawed landscaping plan. Her team agreed with every detail. Claire closed the door. No one leaves until someone tells me why this design fails. Silence. She waited. 5 minutes passed. Then a junior designer named Evan raised his hand. The emergency access lane is too narrow. Claire nodded. What else? Another employee spoke. The shade pattern will kill half the plants. A third pointed out that the playground could not be seen from the main entrance. Within 20 minutes, the table was covered with notes. Claire looked at them. This is what I need, not protection, not agreement. Work. Her deputy met her eyes. We did not know what could reach Daniel. Nothing reaches Daniel through me. The room settled. If you disagree with my decision, say it. If you believe I am receiving special treatment, report it. But do not pretend I cannot handle the truth because you are afraid of a man I am not dating. The honesty shocked them. It also freed them. The revised plan became stronger. Weeks later, Harbor House received final approval. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a cold morning near the edge of Beacon Hill. The site overlooked a row of older homes, a public school, and a bus line that carried workers downtown. Families gathered beneath a white tent. Local business owners stood beside city officials. Children moved between folding chairs while construction equipment waited beyond the fence. Claire stood at the podium. Daniel remained in the audience with Sophie. He had been invited to speak. He declined. This was Claire's project. She looked across the crowd. When people discuss housing, they often begin with units, costs, and market demand. Her hands rested on the podium. I begin with boxes. The crowd quieted. My mother raised 2 children alone. We moved 7 times in 10 years. Every apartment began with boxes and ended with boxes. Daniel watched her. For a child, a home is not an investment. It is the place where you begin believing tomorrow will happen in the same room. Claire looked toward the model behind her. Harbor House was designed for families who deserved that certainty. Applause moved through the tent. Daniel did not stand until everyone else did. After the ceremony, Sophie ran toward Claire carrying a rolled drawing. Claire. Claire turned. For a moment, surprise held her still. Then she smiled. Sophie opened the drawing across a table. It showed the rooftop garden with water tank, solar panels, and a narrow bridge between 2 sections. I fixed the rain collection. Claire leaned closer. You added a second storage tank. Dad said Seattle has enough rain to share. Claire laughed. The sound struck Daniel with the force of a memory. He stood several feet away, unsure whether he had permission to approach. Claire noticed him. Her smile faded slightly, but it did not disappear. Congratulations, Daniel said. Thank you. You did this. My team did. He nodded. Sophie looked between them. I am going to find Grandma. Margaret stood on the other side of the tent. Sophie hurried away before either adult could stop her. Claire folded the drawing carefully. She planned that. She has become strategic. She is a Whitmore. Daniel looked toward the waterfront in the distance. Would you walk with me? Claire hesitated. Then she nodded. They followed a paved path beside the construction fence. The air smelled of wet soil and cedar. Daniel kept his hands in his coat pockets. I used to believe money made honesty impossible. Claire said nothing. The truth is that fear made honesty difficult. I let money become my excuse. She looked ahead. I wanted certainty before I risked anything. That is not how trust works, I know. No. You know now. Yes. They walked several more steps. Daniel continued. I am not asking you to forgive me today. Why are you asking me to walk? Because there is something I need to say without asking for anything in return. Claire stopped. Daniel faced her. I loved the way you treated Sophie before you knew who she was. I loved the way you defended Rosa. I loved how you fought for Harbor House. He took a breath. But I turned those things into evidence. I kept measuring whether you were safe enough for me. Claire's eyes remained guarded. You were never allowed to measure me in return because I controlled the information. Her expression shifted. That is the part you did not understand at the gala. I understand it now. How? Because I have spent 3 months in rooms where everyone knows exactly who I am. Daniel looked back toward the tent. They agree before I finish speaking. They laugh when nothing is funny. They tell me what they think I want, and you miss being invisible, no. He looked at her. I miss being honest with you before you knew I had power. Claire lowered her eyes. Why did you change the employee policies? Because they were needed, not to prove something to me, no. She studied him. That is the first answer you have given me that does not sound like you are trying to keep me. Daniel felt the truth of it. I want you in my life. Claire's shoulders tightened. He continued before she could step away. But wanting you does not give me the right to manage your choice. The tension eased slightly. Claire looked toward Sophie, who was pretending not to watch them from beside Margaret. I missed her. She missed you. I did not know whether seeing her would make things harder. It probably will. Claire almost smiled. At least that was honest. They did not reconcile that day. Claire joined Daniel and Sophie for lunch 2 weeks later in a public park near Green Lake. Sophie brought the bridge model. Daniel brought sandwiches. Claire brought questions. She asked Daniel about Rebecca. He answered without making his former wife entirely responsible. He admitted he had hidden inside work during the marriage. He admitted that after the divorce he became so focused on preventing harm that he forgot protection could become control. Claire asked whether he still intended to live in the waterfront house. Yes. Would our life be public only as much as we both agreed? Would your mother involve herself? Probably. Claire looked at him. Daniel corrected himself. She would try. I would stop her. Margaret received her opportunity several weeks later. Claire agreed to meet her at a small cafe away from Whitmore Tower. Margaret arrived without an assistant. I owe you an apology, she said. Claire waited. Margaret placed both hands around her coffee cup. I believed I understood people. I turned that confidence into permission. You tested me, yes. You watched your son lie to me, yes. And you encouraged it. Margaret's face tightened. At first, Claire did not rescue her from the silence. Finally, Margaret said I was wrong. Daniel said you wanted him to be happy. I did. Good intentions do not make people less injured. No. Claire studied her. You are used to solving problems by creating conditions. Margaret gave a tired smile. That is a generous description of my personality. I will never participate in another family test. You should not. And if Daniel and I ever have a future, decisions about Sophie will not be made around me. Margaret nodded. Understood. Claire leaned back. That was easier than I expected. I built a company by knowing when a negotiation was over. For the first time, Claire smiled. Trust returned in fragments. Daniel attended Claire's community meetings and sat in the back without speaking. Claire visited the Bainbridge house and found no photographers, no formal dinner, and no performance. Sophie convinced her to stay for pancakes. Daniel used too much milk. Claire ate them anyway. One evening, Claire watched Daniel stop in a restaurant to thank a busboy who had found Sophie's scarf. No one was observing him. No board member stood nearby. Claire noticed. Months passed. The distance between them narrowed until one rainy night, while standing beneath the porch light of Daniel's home, Claire kissed him first. Daniel did not ask what it meant. He simply held her as rain moved through the trees. Nearly a year after the Gala Harbor House opened, the rooftop garden overlooked the city. Raised beds filled the space with herbs, tomatoes, and flowers planted by children from the building. Daniel brought Claire there after sunset. Sophie waited beside a wooden bench holding a small box. Claire saw her and immediately looked at Daniel. What did you plan? Something I should have discussed with fewer people. Sophie said, Only me. Daniel led Claire toward the center of the garden. The lights of Seattle spread beyond the roof. The first time I met you, I believed I had to become someone else to be loved. Claire shook her head. You became less powerful, not someone else. Dan was part of me. He still is. Daniel nodded. But he was the part I thought was safe to show. Sophie handed him the box. Daniel did not open it yet. You taught me that love is not being accepted after hiding what frightens you. Claire's eyes filled. It is being known after you finally tell the truth. He lowered himself to one knee. Sophie whispered, now. Claire laughed through her tears. Daniel opened the box. Claire Bennett, will you build a life with all of me? She looked at Sophie. Sophie was crying openly. Claire turned back to Daniel. Yes. Sophie threw her arms around both of them before Daniel could place the ring on Claire's finger. Their wedding took place the following spring inside the community hall at Harbor House. The room was built from cedar and glass. Rain softened the garden outside, but sunlight broke through the clouds shortly before the ceremony. Rosa sat in the front row with Marcus and Keisha. Margaret stood beside Sophie near the entrance. She placed a family necklace around her granddaughter's neck. One day, Margaret said this should go to someone because you trust her, not because tradition tells you to. Sophie touched the silver pendant. I trust Claire, so do I. Claire walked down the aisle alone. Daniel waited with Sophie beside him. When Claire reached them, Sophie took both of their hands and joined them together. During the vows, Claire looked at the guests. I did not fall in love with a billionaire. A few people smiled. I did not fall in love with a janitor either. She turned toward Daniel. I fell in love with a father who listened when his daughter spoke. A man who noticed the people others ignored. A person who finally learned that being known is more frightening and more valuable than being admired. Daniel's voice broke when he answered, I promise there will never again be a version of me you are not allowed to meet. Months later, Daniel, Claire, and Sophie entered Whitmore Tower together. Daniel wore a suit for an executive meeting. Claire carried revised plans for the second Harbor House development. Sophie walked between them, talking about a science project neither adult fully understood. Near the lobby elevators, a newly hired vice president finished his coffee and placed the empty cup on the edge of a custodian's cart. He walked away. Daniel stopped. He picked up the cup. The vice president turned and recognized him. Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry. Daniel placed the cup in the trash. Do not apologize to me. He gestured toward the custodian. Apologize to her. The man turned embarrassed. I am sorry. The custodian nodded. Daniel continued toward the elevators. Sophie took his hand. Claire took the other. They passed the place where Sophie had once stood in a yellow raincoat dripping water onto the marble floor while Daniel begged her not to call him Dad. The elevator doors opened. Daniel looked back at the custodial team moving through the morning crowd. Once he had seen them as people who could teach him how to live without privilege. Now he understood that their dignity had never depended on what he learned from them. It had always existed. The doors began to close. Sophie leaned against Claire. Daniel wrapped an arm around them both. Outside, Seattle rain moved across the glass. Inside, the man who had hidden beneath another name stood beside the two people who knew every part of him. Claire had not loved him because he was rich. She had not loved him because he had pretended to be poor. She loved him after he finally stopped asking to be chosen without allowing himself to be fully seen.